Welcome to this Tutor to You Sociology topic video on changing patterns of family life, looking at divorce. In contemporary society, divorce has become commonplace amongst opposite-sex couples. In 2018, over 90,000 divorces were granted to opposite-sex couples in the UK, with a further 428 divorces granted to same-sex couples. The rate of divorce in the UK has been declining in recent years, but is significantly greater since the introduction of the Divorce Reform Act, which came into place in 1971, a year where 74,000 divorces were granted. This figure rose throughout the 1970s, 80s and early part of 1990s, peaking at 165,000 divorces in 1993, before steadily falling over the next 25 years. This fall is in part due to a similar decline in the number of marriages, but sociologists still research the reasons behind such a sharp increase in divorce rates and look to explain the reasons for the greater insecurity of marriage. They are also concerned with the consequences of divorce, particularly on children and wider society. It also has to be said that these figures don't necessarily represent those who are unhappy in their relationships, as many people choose to separate for a period of time before either reconciling or getting divorced, although it is difficult to measure these cases as they are often open to interpretation over whether the relationship has ended. As we have seen from the statistics, divorce rose dramatically with the introduction of the Divorce Reform Act, which came into force on the 1st of January 1971, and this obviously had an impact on the availability of divorce. But sociologists are interested in some of the motivations behind people's decision to dissolve their marriage. Some of the reasons we're going to examine are listed below, including changing attitudes to relationships, reduced stigma, and the increased secularisation of society, increased life expectancy, changing gender roles in the family, and the growth of individualism in society. We'll look at these in a little more detail now. One of the reasons for the increase in divorce is changing attitudes to relationships. Many late modern thinkers, such as Anthony Giddens and Ulrich Beck, have suggested that in contemporary society, traditional views on relationships becoming permanent have been replaced. Giddens has suggested that confluent love has replaced romantic love, confluent love being based upon the needs of the individuals within those relationships, rather than an idealised version of romantic love where the bond between partners makes people feel complete. As a consequence of this shift, when individuals do not feel like their needs are being fulfilled by their partner, they are more likely to look for another partner that will, and this will lead to the end of a relationship, in the case of marriages, divorce or separation. Beck suggested that relationships are now negotiated between individuals, with conditions based upon the relationship continuing. If these conditions are broken or cease to function, then the relationship is likely to end, thus resulting in divorce or separation for married couples. Functionist views state something quite different. They suggest that people hold higher expectations of marriage than in the past. Rather than an arrangement to provide for the economic and emotional needs of one's partner, there is a need for an idealised relationship. With people demanding more from relationships, it is inevitable that some will fail to meet these standards, and this leads to divorce. A second reason for the increase in divorce is the change in reactions to people getting divorced, namely the reduced stigma of divorce in part due to secularisation. In many religions, marriage is a sacred institution. However, as society undergoes a process of secularisation, a shift from the collective morality of the church to being guided by their own morals, people are increasingly making judgments that are more empathetic and based upon their own interpretations. This has led to many understanding that the end of a relationship is not a failing on the part of the individuals involved, but rather an understanding that two people are no longer compatible. This has reduced the stigma of divorce, particularly for women, and this can be linked to the rise of feminism. With 2 out of every 3 divorces being petitioned for by women, ending a relationship can now be seen as a form of empowerment on their behalf. A further reason for the increased number of divorces is the increased life expectancy of individuals. As people are living longer due to advances in medicine, changing employment practices and better knowledge of health and nutrition, this has a knock-on effect of both delaying when people choose to marry and their likelihood of divorcing. Whereas previous generations may have married younger and died younger, with increased life expectancy, people may be married for 20 years and in an unhappy relationship in their 50s, and so look to change this situation by ending that relationship in order to pursue alternatives. In 2018, the Office for National Statistics reported increased divorce rates for people over 65, with 23% more males divorcing and 38% more females divorcing after the age of 65 than in previous years. This also coincided with an increase in the number of people remarrying over the age of 65, demonstrating that older generations see serial monogamy as an alternative to lifelong partnerships. Changing gender roles is another reason for the initial increase in divorce. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, the rise of second-wave feminism has inspired women to have career aspirations rather than fall into a traditional stereotype of being a wife and mother. This gave women greater financial independence from men, and with the continuation of women's labour in the home through the dual burden and the triple shift, made women realise that they were being oppressed within the family unit. Presently, 2/3 of divorce are petitioned for by women, which demonstrates a growing dissatisfaction with married life for women. Some sociologists have suggested that this is in part due to males' lagged adaptation to changing gender roles, and combined with growing individualism in society and the crisis of masculinity, changing gender roles can be seen as a rational explanation for the increase in the number of divorces compared to the late 1960s, when gender roles were based upon more traditional stereotypes. A further explanation for the rise of divorce is the growing individualism in society. Sociological approaches such as the individualisation thesis suggest that people are increasingly looking outside the family unit in order to satisfy their needs. Previously, many sacrificed their own needs for the greater good that was the family unit, but with the rise of individualism, and allied to concepts such as Giddens' confluent love and Bauman's liquid love, people are choosing to satisfy their own needs rather than preserving the family unit. These late modern approaches see relationships and marriage as a transaction. One that once it has served its purpose is replaced by another. People are opting for serial monogamy over lifelong relationships, a symptom of late modernity according to some theorists. Sociologists also focus on the consequences of divorce for family members and wider society. Divorce often brings conflict within the family. Some ideals of cooperative parenting are emergent. However, for most relationships, conflict, particularly where a relationship involves children, impacts on their self-esteem and the happiness of their children. Disagreements over access to children, financial support and new partners are commonplace in divorced families. Another consequence is the formation of new families. If divorced parents become involved in a new relationship, this can have effects on their children, particularly if the new partner has an involvement in parenting of their non-biological child. A further consequence is the increase of remarriages. Nearly 40% of marriages in the UK are second marriages for one or more of the partners involved. Furthermore, the increase in lone person households and lone parent households in the initial aftermath of separation has a knock-on effect on housing and welfare, whilst the financial issue of supporting one household becoming two are another consequence of divorce. With two rents or two mortgages to pay, two sets of utility bills and council tax, the financial strain of divorce can be telling, particularly for those on low incomes. That concludes this Tutor to You Sociology topic video on changing patterns of family life, examining divorce. Thanks for watching.